Bob Marley said, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. Watch this, sir. He said, none but ourselves will free ourselves. Okay? The same Torah said, my people are destroyed because of what? Lack of what? Of knowledge, ignorance. And ignorance is a choice.
So with me now, you can understand everything we are talking about today. Stay where you are based on the reality around you, and you still know God. You are not shortchanging. You are still perfect, correct?
Yes. Christianity is an indigenous religion in Africa. Judaism is an indigenous religion in Africa. How? Through the lineage of King Solomon and Queen Sheba.
Hi, and thank you for checking out Obehi Podcast. We encourage people to own their story and share it with the world to expand their purpose. Before we start this presentation, I have something to quickly share with you. Are you a purpose-driven entrepreneur? Do you want to cut across the noise and attract your ideal client by leveraging your own story? Then pay attention. I have a signature program that can help you own your story. A 5-step transformative journey to reshape your professional and business narrative for success in less than 90 days. And it's available at academy.aclasses.org/story. This is what we have understood. Storytelling is the most powerful instrument known to man. And this is what that could mean to you. You can either own your story and use it to advance your purpose in your business and professional life, or someone else will do. The choice is yours. Now let's get started with today's episode of the Obehi Podcast.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, all our viewers across the globe. Thank you so much for joining this podcast today. Today, we are going to look at a very important aspect of our indigenous spirituality in Africa. Today, we are going to build up a case to establish the fact that Christianity is a source of indigenous spirituality in Africa. And we are going to explore indigenous spirituality of Christianity in Africa. And we believe that discovering your spiritual identity is the foundation of the emancipation journey in Africa, journey to emancipation from mental slavery. So join me as we explore the very root of Christianity as a force contributing to indigenous spirituality in Africa. Welcome once again. My name is Oluwafemi Esan. I'm the ambassador of the Sovereign Kingdom of Hawaii to the United Kingdom. I'm also the roving ambassador of the State of African Diaspora based in the United Kingdom. I'm also the professor of biblical psychology and transpersonal psychology at the Faculty of Biblical Psychology at London University. Once again, welcome to this very podcast. So we are going to start with indigenous spirituality. And one thing we want to establish is that indigenous spirituality came from indigenous religion. When we're talking about indigenous spirituality in Africa, what are the features of indigenous spirituality in Africa? Number one, it is very relational. That is, it is built upon a psychosocial space of relationship. Indigenous spirituality is not only relational, it is also place the individual within the collective consciousness of the people of Africa. Now, another distinct feature of indigenous spirituality in Africa is ancestral worship. Now, some people will be listening to this and started thinking that, oh, are you saying Christianity also can be grouped under ancestral worship? The Christianity also worship ancestral, or they make relevance to their ancestral. Yes, of course, yes. It is fully established in Christianity about the relevance to ancestral worship, but not worshiping ancestral as small God, but making relevant to ancestral covenant For example, you will hear such in the Torah about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You remember their expression that says, and God remembered the covenant he made with Abraham. So that is ancestral lineage worship there, which is clearly demarcated in Christianity, in the Torah, as an indigenous spirituality within Africa. So we say ancestral worship is a key aspect of African religion, with some traditions regarding ancestors as equal to or superior to deity. Also, people listening to us may say, oh, are you saying that in Christianity there's a room for seeing our ancestors as deity? Yes, of course, which we are going to establish that in this very podcast today. Also, indigenous spirituality is also characterized by ritualistic practices. Yes, do you have ritualistic practices in Christianity coming from Judaism? Absolutely, yes. The act of worship, the act of singing, these are ritualistic practices to invoke a spiritual atmosphere to the presence of Yahweh. So I can boldly say that looking at the futures of indigenous spirituality in Africa, in Judaism, which gave birth to Christianity, can be thoroughly placed under this future, as we are going to see in this podcast today. Now, talking about indigenous spirituality in Africa, we said it's coming from indigenous religion, which is central around ritual rather than belief or faith. They are learning from participation and experience rather than instruction. So we now see that one thing that is very outstanding about indigenous spirituality from indigenous religion in Africa, it is the experiential knowing. And that is key. And it's not based on theoretical or based on instruction. So you get involved. Now that question is, do Christianity and Judaism fall under this criteria? Yes, of course, because the Jews that are the founder of the indigenous Judaism, which Judaism is an indigenous religion of the indigenous Jewish people, which we also found them in Africa through Ethiopia, as we are going to see in this podcast today. They also practice and get engaged in the experiential knowledge in contact through the ritualistic practice of worshiping Yahweh. And so you can see again that Judaism giving birth to Christianity can also fall under this category. It is also embedded in culture. Ladies and gentlemen, at this junction, we cannot separate culture from religion. Our cultural practices are a form of identity that religion become a distinct feature of the cultural identity of our people, indigenous people in Africa. And therefore, when we're talking about spirituality, it is a cultural aspect of identity. And so it's not something that was brought to us by the colonial master. No, it is embedded in the fabric of our culture. Therefore, spirituality through the various indigenous religions in Africa contributed to our cultural identity. We Africans, we are spiritually engaged and we are spiritually aware based on our cultural fabric. That is, spirituality, indigenous spirituality is a cultural thing for us in Africa. They are also deeply embedded in cultures of local ethnic groups that they belong to. And they are informed by ecologies, foragers, pastoralists, and horticulturalists. So there are different sources. If you look at the complexity and the multidimensional, or what I would say, multidisciplinary aspect of our indigenous religion in Africa, it can be traced to the contribution of the eco-psychology, environmental psychology is there. You can see how these different aspects of our life in the indigenous world, talking about the pre-colonial era of the African psychology, you can see how different sources has contributed to the culture and religion that is now a foundation of who we are. Now, talking about that, there are also distinct features that you can see in indigenous spirituality in Africa. And then we now look at Judaism and will they be able to align to this future that we can now say that Judaism and Christianity are a source of indigenous spirituality in Africa? Now, looking at the hierarchy of mystical beings in indigenous spirituality. So indigenous spirituality also believe in hierarchy of mystical beings. also you can find that in Judaism and also in Christianity. There are mystical beings, angelic beings, in terms of different forms of angel that intervene in the affairs of man through ritualistic place of prayer and worship there. That this is also featured in both Christianity and Judaism. Now, Africans also believe in hierarchy of mystical beings, followed by divinities, spirit, and ancestors, with God at the top. And this quite sit very well within Judaism and Christianity. So there are divinities. And in fact, we are going to prove to you in this very podcast today that divinity within the fabric of the gods is also engraved in the Torah and also in the New Testament or Christian faith. And therefore, we can say that Christianity and Judaism, they are a source of indigenous spirituality in Africa. Then they talk about evil spirit. The concept of evil spirit is a key major factor in Africa. Now, talking about evil spirit, now this is very important because when we look at evil spirit and what we call evil spirit or the existence of evil spirit in Africa, it is very, very important to understand and to fully know that this entity called evil spirit and how it affects lives in Africa, and the belief in the realm of evil spirit can be seen and can be said to affect the mental health and so this is very important and this is very foundational. Taking note about this is very, very important in the sense that Africans, before any introduction of any form of foreign religion to us, we have established the concept and the reality that there is an entity called evil spirit. We believe in indigenous spirituality about the spiritual realm of evil that can inspire thought into the mind of people and that can lead to people having behavior that can be classified as being evil. So when you look at the behavioral psychology based on the African spirituality, indigenous spirituality, there is a room for transpersonal intervention in the African's indigenous spirituality. And this is very key. That's why I'm taking time to explain this, that ever before the beginning or introduction of any colonized religion into us, we have a system of belief in evil spirit. And we know there's an entity that exists as evil in indigenous spirituality in Africa. Does Judaism and Christianity have that? Absolutely yes. Again, we can also prove and claim that Judaism and Christianity, they are a source of indigenous spirituality in Africa. Africans fear evil spirit, which they believe manifest themselves in destructive people like witches and ancestral, which is true. And that is so also established in Judaism and Christianity, and it also exists there. You can find this parallel within Judaism and Christianity, and therefore we can say Christianity and Judaism, they are a source of indigenous spirituality in Africa. Ancestral spirit as guardians. Now, do we believe in ancestral spirit in Christianity and Judaism? Of course, yes. You hear examples of Israel, the Jewish people praying to the God of Abraham and Isaac, invoking the God of their forefathers, ancestral father, to intervene in their situation and to bring deliverance in various encounters when they encounter problems and challenges on their way to the promised land. Again, we can see that ancestral spirit as guardian. It's also exhibited within the framework of Judaism and the Christian faith, which is now being regarded as part of our indigenous spirituality. I know. So those are the main feature that we can now say that okay, we can now look at Judaism and tell us okay, what is Judaism? Is there any history? Is there any history or is there any event that shows that Judaism is embedded in the cultural religious fabric of Africa? Of course, yes. Follow me carefully as we look at the origin of Judaism in Ethiopia. It is also believed that descendant of the lost tribe of Dan. Some people believe that the Beta Israel or Ethiopian Jews are descendant of the lost Hebrew tribe of Dan. One major, what I would call hereditary scientific evidence is the descendant of King Solomon and Queen Sheba. Of Queen Sheba. These are fundamental evidence that shows that Judaism is not only a religion that crept itself into the African continent. Judaism is ingrained in the DNA of the African people by blood through King Solomon and Queen Sheba. Now, Queen Sheba was impregnated by King Solomon, and he brought the son to Ethiopia. And this tells us that Judaism is not just it's a foreign religion that was imported by the Jewish people. No, we are genetically connected to Judaism through Queen Sheba, by the fact that he had a son. So the Ethiopian Jew, the existence of the Ethiopian Jew tells us that Judaism that gives birth to Christianity is a part of our DNA. It is traceable to its origin in Solomon and Queen Sheba. Therefore, Judaism is part of our culture in the African continent through this very mixed race son of Queen Sheba and King Solomon. And so we see now Judaism now enter into the cultural and genetic fabric of Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, let no man fool us in Africa. Judaism is not a foreign white man religion, and Judaism did not enter into Africa through colonization. No, Judaism that gave birth to Christianity entered into Africa through genetic hereditary factor, and that is it. So for centuries, the Ethiopian Jews have been practicing Judaism. You can see that. So when we're talking about indigenous religion in Africa, Judaism is one of many of the indigenous religions in Africa. This is factual. This is hereditary. There is hereditary evidence of this, and that's what we're establishing. So when we're not talking about, what are the indigenous religions that contributed to indigenous spirituality in Africa, Judaism is a major factor there. Now, others also believe that the Beta Israel are the descendant of Menek, son of King Solomon and Queen Sheba, descendant of Jews who fled Judah. Some believe that the Beta Israel are descendant of Jews who fled Judah for Egypt after the destruction of the first temple in 586 BC. Now, they also believe that descendant of local Adu people. Some believe that at least some of the Beta Israel ancestors were local Adu people who converted to Judaism. Now, in all these different sources, one source that is inevitable, that is evidence, it is the hereditary source, the Ethiopian Jew, through the lineage of the son of King Solomon that Queen Sheba gave birth to. So we now see that Judaism entered into Africa. Judaism is an indigenous religion of Africa. Judaism that gave birth to Christianity is an indigenous part of cultural identity of Africans. Yeah. Again, we now see that the Beta Israel Jewish community in Ethiopia, that they have lived at least 15 centuries. Yeah, they've lived 15 centuries there. Now, they likely arrived in Ethiopia as merchants or artisans from various countries in the region between the 1st and the 6th century. Now, in 1973, Rabbi Ovidia Yosef ruled that the Beta Israel were Benia Israel, or sons of Israel, according to Jewish law. This allowed many to immigrate to Israel, and the evidence is there. They are there, for everyone to see. The evidence of the Jewish Ethiopian Jew is there that return back to Israel. Also, there's another archaeological evidence. The archaeological data combined with the radiocarbon dating suggests that Basilica stemmed from the 4th or perhaps early 5th century, making it certainly among the earliest known churches in sub-Saharan Africa. In addition, given the reliability of the archaeological data combined with radiocarbon dating, it seemed to be the earliest securely database church in sub-Saharan Africa. It's the church that was on earth in Ethiopia, the Basilica. It shows that Christianity has been in Africa through Judaism long before, between the 7th to the 4th century AD. Therefore, we can boldly say that Christianity did not come to Africa through colonization. No. Judaism did not come to Africa through colonization. It were both hereditary and through trade interaction. Now, the church that was on earth in Ethiopia, this is what made the discovery of this basilica so important. But it is reliable evidence for a Christian presence slightly northeast of Aksum at a very early date. Christianity entered Ethiopia via the kingdom of Aksum in the 1st century. So this is very vital. In the archaeological historical data of Christianity, in Africa. So we have to understand and to lay this foundation that Christianity is an integrate part of our religion and identity in Africa, through ancestral linkage, through hereditary linkage. In other words, we now see that the kingdom of Aksum in the 4th century AD, within the context of international trade, linking the Mediterranean Sea and the Indian Ocean during the 1st to 7th century, Christianity did not enter Africa through colonization. Let's make this clear in this podcast to all our African people, both in Africa and Africa in diaspora. Christianity did not enter Africa through colonization. Therefore, in the history of indigenous religion, indigenous spirituality, Christianity is an integral central part of indigenous African religion. And that is the note there. And on that note, we can now look at what is Christian spirituality. Now, Christian spirituality as a source of indigenous spirituality is about understanding how we understand God, the material world, and human identity. You see, this is very important to us in Africa as we embark on the journey of decolonization and emancipation from mental slavery and colonial trauma. We have to look at our spiritual identity. We look at our relationship with the material world. We also look at our relationship with God, how we relate to God, the Father, through Jesus Christ, united in the Holy Spirit. How does this lead to our emancipation? How does it lead into our discovery of our true spiritual identity, which is a foundation for our emancipation in Africa from mental slavery? We talk about personal transformation, how we grow in union with God through grace, building upon the psycho-spiritual philosophy of Christian spirituality, coming from a Christian religion as an integral part of our identity. Now, ladies and gentlemen, at this junction, we now focus on the concept of spiritual identity. Now, what is spiritual identity? It's how a person incorporates spirituality into their sense of self and their relationship with their ego. This is very vital. I'm going to take my time to explain to our audience today, to all our African people, African in diaspora, the global community of Africans. Whenever we are talking about our identity discovery, we are talking about our emancipation and decolonization of our curriculum, to live our life, to free ourselves, we have to talk about our spiritual identity. And that is our sense of self derived from our spiritual source. Now, spiritual identity can also be defined as understanding who you are in your relation to God. This is not religion. It is your personal relationship with God. Some say that spiritual identity can help people find meaning and safety in their life, which is beautiful. Now you can see that we are now building a foundation for mental emancipation, a foundation for building spiritual resilience to cope in the challenges of our mental world today. It is true spiritual identity. And at this junction, I would also like to say to our African brothers across the globe that spirituality is engraved within our fabric of our culture and identity. We are spiritual people. Our indigenous spirituality is the source of our identity. And any curriculum that will neglect that aspect of our identity is part of colonization up to now. And so today, we are still suffering from neo-colonization of our curriculum and our intellectual consciousness, because we are now adopting the materialistic ontology of the Western education, which is far, far away from the true indigenous spirituality. Now, others say that spirituality involves exploring universal themes like love, compassion, and wisdom. Some say that your sense of value is rooted in your identity, and that's true. Your sense of value is rooted in your identity, and that is both true naturally and spiritually. Your sense of value is rooted in your identity. Thus, we define spiritual identity as a persistent sense of self that addresses ultimate questions about nature, about purpose, meaning of life, resulting in behavior that are constant with the individual's core value. So this is the foundation for emancipation. This is the foundation for emancipation. And then going further, what is spiritual identity? Is to know God and understand who you are within God. That's it. It has nothing to do with any religious, external ritualistic activity. Your spiritual identity is to know God and understand who you are within God. Individuals who find the reason for their lives in God and are recognized by God can develop their true identities and discover safeness and meaning for their life. Discovering your spiritual identity is the key to unlocking the true meaning of life. That's it. I'll say that again. Discovering your spiritual identity is the key to unlocking the true meaning of life. Gain a deeper understanding of your spiritual identity. Learn how it can transform your thoughts, your beliefs, and actions. Find peace, purpose, and direction as you explore the power of knowing who you are in Christ through indigenous spirituality. Then you'll be able to discover the true meaning of your life. How to discover your spiritual identity? By reading and meditating on the word of God. You can renew your mind, transform your life. You will discover that you have a new spiritual identity once you understand who you are, and you can start being who you are. And that is where the ritualistic practice of reading the Torah, meditating upon the Torah, as you know that Christianity came from Judaism. And the concept of spirituality from Christianity is based on the scriptures of the New Testament and the scriptures of the Torah from Judaism. And in engaging with this scripture through transcendental meditation is where you begin to invoke a sense of the presence of God into your personal space. And this has nothing to do with any religious code of conduct. Spirituality identity means that we are not what we do, one, or what people say about us, two, or we are not what we have. We are the beloved daughters and sons of God. This is liberation. And let me quote the Torah. The Torah says in Psalm 82 verse 6, I have said, ye are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High. What does that mean? Again, he said, I have said, ye are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High. However, what the Torah said? So ye shall die like men and fall like one of the princes. Why? If you don't have this understanding and discovery that you are a spiritual being and your true identity is in God. Who are the children of the Most High God? For you are sons of God through faith in Christ Jesus. For as many as were baptized into Christ are put on Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither slave nor free. There is neither male nor female. For you are all one in Christ Jesus. And that is the philosophy of the Torah and the Christian faith, telling you that there is no gender. Ethnic identity is not in the spiritual identity. When we talk about gender identity, they all dissolve in spiritual identity. Now, male and female, there is no gender discrimination in spiritual identity. Spiritual identity is a true source of unity in Africa. When we embrace our indigenous spiritual identity, we are all spirit and we are all part of the universal consciousness. And that is the most important thing. And when I look at this from the Hebrew theology and I check what is that very word God in the Hebrew, it means Elohim from Psalm 82 verse 6. What's this? In Psalm 82, the Hebrew word Elohim is used both singular and plural. In verse 1, Elohim refers to God with a singular noun. In verse 6, Elohim refers to other members of the divine council, meaning gods. Now, you now see here that the Hebrew Judaistic philosophy call every one of us gods, small gods, and that's what the African call the deities. So therefore, you are a deity. So when the Africans are talking about ancestral deity, it is also from Jewish philosophy. We are gods with small g. And we are God. And so the African belief system that believe in ancestral worship, ancestral deities that exist, that we see our ancestors as deities. We are deities. That is also firmly established in Judaism because ye are gods and the children of Most High God. And that is our true identity. We are gods. We are children of the Most High God. Now, this is the foundation for our spiritual emancipation and intellectual emancipation. Every emancipatory effort that is not built on the foundation of spiritual identity will not liberate us. We is still going to enslave our mentality into materialism, which is a key limitation of the Western philosophy of education. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to let you know that Christianity is a source of indigenous spirituality, and the discovery of our indigenous spirituality is the foundation of our emancipation in Africa.
All right. Thank you so much for that presentation. That was really, really lovely and full of value. Of course, as always, there are a lot of nuggets that people can take away from your presentation, and I really appreciate it. I really appreciate it so much, and I'm so happy that we're able to do this, able to make help the people understand how to find their way around. And I think the conversation of today is really very important, talking about Christianity as a source of spirituality in Africa. I remember, for example, just before we started just now, I was asking you if Christianity can be said to be the source of African spirituality, or if Christianity is actually derived from African spirituality. And I thought I want to be very clear on that even in your explanation, you actually filter in the response indeed. But of course, we have time to respond to each and every one of my perplexity, my curiosity around that, because of course we are here to help the people understand more what they might have heard before. Maybe they didn't have a clearer understanding on that, and we are happy that you are here to help us understand that. All right, so the first question is, I don't know if you want to say a word again about the fact that whether Christianity is actually an indigenous religion, and what would that really imply for people of African descent who are listening to us?
Thank you so much. You just said it perfectly. Christianity is an indigenous religion in Africa. Judaism is an indigenous religion in Africa. How? Through the lineage of King Solomon and Queen Sheba. The interaction between them gave birth to the the Ethiopian Jews, which practice Judaism, and it later led to the oldest church that was found, the basilica that was found in Ethiopia between the 7th century. And that tells you that Christianity and Judaism are part of indigenous African religion and spirituality. It did not come into Africa through colonization. It is through our hereditary, by the mixing, the hereditary blood between King Solomon and Queen Sheba, that lead to the Ethiopian Jews, which are Africans. Thank you.
This argument is really very important, and I believe that we're going to come to it again because I think that at a point we're going to really take this research down deeper in history, because we know, based on scientific evidence, capability, and history, both oral narration and what we can find in stone, in rock, that humanity have been in Africa for very many years before it could migrate to other part of the world. So if we are looking at the question of spirituality, we must look for a way to understand it beyond whatever we can find in Harvard or in Oxford, because those are reading from what they can find. But what they can find is written in Africa. It's in Africa. Africa is the home of humanity. So we must look for a way to understand this deeper. That is why I like the approach to understanding it from indigenous understanding of life, of philosophy, of approach, of spirituality, of life, of death, of the afterworld also. So that is very important for me. Now, you made mention of something where I think I will ask you two questions there. We talk about ancestral worship, which is found both in Christianity and also in African religion. Now, I want you to help us understand, where is this actually coming from? Of course, we understand that it's not coming from Christianity because it's deeper than Christianity. We understand that. But where is it coming from? This idea that we refer to our ancestors when we want to pray or meditate or refer to something beyond us. Can you help us understand that?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for that question. If it is well rooted in Judaism, and Judaism, as we know that the three Abrahamic religions, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, all came from our father Abraham. So God, the God of the Jews, the Yahweh, the Almighty God, or you call Allah in Islam, met with Abraham. He had a covenant with Abraham, okay? And that covenant was extended to his generations. So you hear expressions such as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So when Isaac also came into the understanding that the God has a covenant with my Abraham, so we call it Abrahamic covenant. You see that, which is still existing today. The Jewish, just recently, you can see that's about a few years ago, there was an accord between some Arab nations and the Jews, and they call it Abrahamic accord. You see that? It is referring to the Abrahamic covenant, and that is purely lineage, ancestral lineage, a covenant in ancestral lineage. So when the Israelites, we get in, when we look at the historical theology, when they get to certain places on their journey to the promised land, they encounter things and they call upon the God of Abraham. What is that? Ancestral link. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. I'm trying to understand it. Again, I am saying that perhaps we come back to this argument again because it is fundamentally important for us. Now, we're talking of the life of Abraham,
Yes.
which is actually the starting point for the Abrahamic religion, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. But okay, if we look at the life of Abraham, I think some people are putting it at about 3,000-4,000 years ago, more or less, which, if we were to be looking at people outside of Africa, it might look very many years ago. But if we take that and put it in the timeline of African history, it actually looked like yesterday. Therefore, can we have an understanding of ancestral worship or the reverence to African, as it is today in African tradition, in African religion, or if we were to look at it from the point of view of Christianity? I mean, can we have an understanding of it outside the Abrahamic religion, or is that the only way for us to know of what is meant by ancestral worship? That is what I'm trying to understand. If we don't have all the response to it today, it's no problem. We can always come back to it. We are not in haste.
No, if you look at my discourse, the African spirituality came from different indigenous African religion. Okay. Then if you in my discourse, I will look at the characteristics of the features of African indigenous spirituality. One of the features is ancestral worship is key there. So ancestral worship is also among is a common theme among many indigenous African religions. They make reference to the ancestral deity. It is there. So and the goal of today's discourse is to show to you that Christianity and Judaism is an indigenous religion in Africa through the Ethiopia connection. And that's it.
Thank you for that. I like that. I like that. But I'm going to hang on there on a bit because of your type of personality, because you are very vast in the topic, no? Both on spirituality, on psychology, most importantly, because my question now is relating to psychology. Is that how do you explain it from the point of psychology that we as a human being have to connect to our ancestors to understand what is happening to us? I'm looking at it purely as a psychological understanding. What do you say?
Now, thank you so much. Conventional psychology has no room or framework for that. Don't forget, the only aspect of psychology that accommodates indigenous spirituality and spirituality as a whole is transpersonal psychology, which simply means psychology of spirituality or spiritual psychology. Now, in transpersonal psychology, we talk about transpersonal identity. Before you talk about transpersonal identity, we also establish the question of transpersonal ontology. Now, ontology, which we know, is a study of reality and the source of reality. Now, in transpersonal psychology, one concept of reality is ultimate reality, and that is God. You see that? So, and that is God. Now, with that comes the issue of your identity. So your identity comes from the very source. But don't forget, you cannot talk about your identity without your ancestor. You were born into the human family with a lineage. You have a father. That's your father is your ancestor. It's simple.
Thank you so much for that. And for those that are listening to us, I wanted to know that Professor Oluwafemi is actually very vast on it and is having a lot of content that can help you understand this in deeper sense. If you want to have a good understanding in it, his books are coming where he really sit down and help you understand the dimension of what he's talking about today, because his approach to transpersonal psychology have very many way to help you understand very many things, not only spirituality, but also in leadership, in economy. In a couple of days from now, we'll be having a combined episode where we'll be looking at leadership, both from the point of view of transpersonal psychology and also in other area. So even in mental health too. So he's really an expert in the field. That is why we are always very happy to have him around with us. The colonization of the Bible. I think somebody was making a reference to that. There was an African American writer and a historian. I don't know if he was actually, I forgot his name now, who was saying that the European actually colonized the Bible and therefore used the Bible to colonize people. And I wanted to speak more on that. Also from the point of view of psychology, because some of these things we need to deconstruct them so that people can understand.
Thank you. In fact, we are still going to have a whole podcast on that, sir. The decolonization of the Bible. Because it has led to a rebellious attitude among Africans looking at the Christian faith, because it has been attributed to the Eurocentric philosophy. Not only that, you look at the pictures of Jesus and it's a white Jesus, which you can easily prove that Jesus coming from the lineage of Mary, great grandmother is Rahab the harlot, who happened to be a Cushite, and Cushite is black. So Mary has a mixed race lineage. So Jesus came through a mixed race lineage, if you are talking about that. But you see, the danger here is that I don't want us to look at Jesus from a materialistic ontology. Black Jesus, white Jesus. And that's another danger. So we lose the essence of spirituality in Christianity. When we begin to filter, because you now see that in the New Testament, it said there's neither Greek nor Jew. There's neither male or female. There's neither slave or free. Everybody are sons of God. And that is the narrative that we need to establish. Thank you.
That is an important conversation. But of course, like you said, we'll come back to it on a separate episode where we'll talk about the colonization of the Bible and therefore the decolonization of the Bible. Because it makes someone want to reflect that God created all of us equal. But of course, the European didn't say this, where in their approach at least, not in what they say. I'm talking of what they do. We published an article recently where we talk of the role of the church in slavery. Because, these things are really deeply rooted in us that we should understand them. We should really have a good understanding of them.
Mm.
We don't need to judge people by what they say. We judge people by what they do. What the Europeans have done for over 500 years does not explain that God created us equal. It says that God created the European as the master of Africans so that we are supposed to serve them. That is their approach. But they say something completely different. So I don't need to believe what they say. I believe what they do. Okay.
Well, can I say something on that?
Yeah, please go.
Please pardon me. Permit me to say something because it's a critical point in this very discourse today. And what I'm saying, and I will be saying to every human, not even our African people, is that you don't need anybody's interpretation to determine your spiritual identity, because every man is entitled to his own interpretation and framework of religious experiences. You don't need to base your identity on my experience of God. You have the right to know God for yourself. That is fundamental.
Okay. Now, because you have said that, I'm sort of wondering, are we really free to have our interpretation of the Bible, or do we adhere to what we are taught using the Bible as a means of reference? Now, this is what I mean. If we go to churches in Nigeria, are we really free to put any image there as the image of God? Or do we put the image there that is coming from the Vatican? And this is the image of Jesus Christ, for example. When we talk of reading about Christianity, are we free to read about it, read our own source, or create our own sources about it, or read the Bible? In this case, now using maybe the Bible that was written by King James. King James, it was a king in England. He decided to write his own version of the Bible. And we as Christians use that as our reference of what God is saying. Is it even possible for us to imagine that King James could have an intention of what he wants to say, and therefore put that in the Bible? And we now are reading that, and we are doing our interpretation. But interpretation based on what?
That's exactly the colonization agenda. You just said it now. King James Version. So to understand, number one, you go back to the root, Judaism, Aramaic, Hebrew. So you do a word study, looking at the original meaning of words. So the original meanings of words, yes, and that is key. You see that? The original language of Judaism is Aramaic, Hebrew, not English. So we are now in a knowledge-driven world. So go back to the root. That is where you start the liberation process. Bob Marley said, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. Watch this, sir. He said, none but ourselves will free ourselves. Okay? The same Torah said, my people are destroyed because of what? Lack of what? Of knowledge, ignorance. And ignorance is a choice. So it is often said that if you want to hide something from a black man, put it in a book. Why did they say that? Because they've studied us, that we don't have a culture of continuous learning. It's not in our culture. It's part of the colonial mentality trauma we are fighting. And that's why what we are doing is to educate people. See, just go to Google. You type in Hebrew meaning of war. It will come out. You only need an internet. And that's all. But when people are mentally lazy, they are not studying, they don't have a culture, you don't want to. Part of liberation is knowledge. You will know the truth. You see? And the truth will set you free. The words of Yeshua HaMashiach. He said the knowledge of the truth is what set you free. Not anybody laying hands on you or putting oil on you. Is the knowledge of the truth. Now, seeking knowledge is a personal endeavor. You have to take your own emancipation by yourself. Not ours, none but ourselves. We free ourselves. The words of Bob Marley.
Thank you for that. I'm just keeping quiet so that message can go home, because it is very important. Because it brought to the table of the individual now that we need to do the work. I don't need to contest that. Thank you. Now, you also said something that is very important, which is, I think you refer to it as spiritual identity. And of course, in this case, we're looking at Africans and the African diaspora. And of course, it's in line with what we are just saying. Could you please say more on that? And why is it important for us?
Oh, thank you so much for this question. Before that, I will go back to the colonized curriculum and the colonized Bible and colonized religion. Now, look at those words: colonized religion, colonized Bible, and colonized curriculum. Now, the colonized agenda is based on one ontology. Watch this, which is materialistic ontology. Therefore, the colonized agenda looks at material things. It started from the Greek philosophy of superiority complex. They said, oh, the gods have chosen someone with white skin, long nose, thin lips. The gods have chosen them to be what? Leader with a charisma. So their gods chose people based on physicality. Now you now see that kind of belief system is based on materialism. Now, the Africans are also buying into that. Black Jesus. No. There's neither Greek nor Jew in Christ Jesus. There's neither male nor female in Christ Jesus. Why? Because spirit has no gender. Spirit has no ethnicity. Spirit is purely from the universal consciousness, which is ultimate reality itself, and that is God, and which many of the indigenous African religions subscribe to that philosophy, even though they have hierarchy of deities and divinities. But God is on the top, the supreme being on the top. And they believe that we all came from that universal consciousness, that supreme being, that God himself. Now, this is fundamental to our liberation, to our emancipation. Because up till now, we are still reading the Bible through a colonized mindset, which is a materialistic Bible. Thank you.
Is it possible that we can ever take the Bible out of the context for us to understand our spirituality? Because I remember just now we were saying that we were talking of making mention of King James Version. I was saying, well, if you want to understand it, you should go and find out what is actually the true meaning of, well, looking at Aramaic, maybe looking at the Jewish text. But what if there are people, of course, there are many people, millions of them, who do not even understand those terms? Can they understand what we are talking about today without going to the Google, going to read a book? Can they understand it in their own culture and still be able to connect to God?
When talking about Africa indigenous spirituality, no white man brought that to us. It is within, embedded in our fabric of reality. So indigenous spirituality in Africa tradition is built on spiritual ontology. What that simply means, you don't need to be a scholar. What that simply means is that our concept of reality in Africa is spirituality. We believe in Africa that the spiritual realm gave birth to the physical realm. That is the foundation.
So with me now, you can understand everything we are talking about today. Stay where you are based on the reality around you, and you still know God. You are not shortchanging. You are still perfect, correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
You don't need to study the Bible. You don't need to study anything before you can know that you are a spirit. It is purely experiential. So when now go to study, it's now improve and refine your mentality. You are transforming your mind by studying, knowing the truth for yourself. And the more truth you know, the more freedom you encounter, because you will know the truth. The truth that you know is the knowledge of the truth that sets free, not theology. You see that? Not religion. It's a personal encounter with knowledge of the truth. What is truth? Reality. You see that? So it's the knowledge of reality. And that reality is based on what? Spiritual identity. This is the foundation. If we have any intervention in this decolonization movement or this emancipation movement that is not built on the reality of spiritual identity, we are still colonized. That's it.
Thank you so much for that. Now, there is a topic that you are really very heavy on, which is mental health. And now, I'm not saying that mental health affects only people of African descent in the diaspora, but that is important for us. That is our audience. Now, how can what we discuss today or what we are discussing today be advantageous to people of African descent, understanding their spiritual identity?
Yes. This is the burden, sir. This is the passion. Because the hegemony the dominant hegemony in the curriculum of mental health and psychiatric medicine is built on the Eurocentric materialistic ontology. That's it. They view man as a dual of mind and body. You see, the dominant hegemony of the Western curriculum does not see man as a spirit. No, it is not built on spiritual framework. Now, the spiritual framework that is integral to the indigenous spirituality of the African people is the foundation of true spiritual resilience. We are talking about spiritual resilience, sir. Spiritual resilience is uprooted from the foundation of my spiritual identity. The moment I come to know the truth that I'm a spirit, that liberates me from the materialistic colonization of my intellectual consciousness. Me and you were born in the post-colonial era. And don't forget, by 1915, 95% of the world was colonized. And then you can trace that to education. So the education that me and you receive is based on a colonized Christian faith. And that is the truth of the matter. And that's why it's good for us to trace back the root of Christianity in Africa. And we have established today from archaeological evidence that Christianity did not reach Africa to colonization. Judaism did not reach Africa to colonization. It was truly hereditary. Now, knowing that is not just starting point. Knowing that is to now go back and discover your true sense of self through your spiritual identity. Why this is important is that our liberation from colonial mentality, our liberation from colonial curriculum, it is rooted in our discovery of our spiritual identity. Now, there are many Christians that they don't even know that they are spirit. So it's not just being a Christian, it's the experiential discovery of the truth that I'm a spirit. I don't need a man to validate that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. This is the last one. Of course, I also like to point out that we didn't really dwell so much on the decolonization of the Bible and the colonization, because we did promise that we're going to come to that argument, because otherwise I have another question to ask you, but I just reserved them. Now, I don't know if you want to recommend maybe some ways or something that people could do in order to learn more about their spiritual identity, because I think that have remained a fundamental point in the conversation today, understanding your fundamental identity. So what should people do in order to sort of learn more about their spiritual identity?
I want to say something that you're going to step on many people's toes that have held us captive. You don't need anything. You don't need any ritualistic system. Where you are, just say to yourself, God, if you are real, reveal yourself to me. That's all.
Thank you so much for that. Is there anything you would like to say to conclude?
Yes, I want to say thank you, Selby, for this broadcast. And this is very important for us. Because again, religion has been used as a weapon to colonize our mind. And we are still suffering from neo-colonization of our intellectual and religious life. Therefore, we need the knowledge of the truth to set ourselves free. And that knowledge is personal. You don't need any ritualistic system. You don't need to be in any four walls of anybody's religion, any four walls of any building, because God is a spirit. And they that we worship God, we worship in spirit and in truth. So the only way to worship God is in your spirit. And your spirit does not need any physical building to experience God. You can experience God where you are right now. Just talk to God where you are right now, and He will reveal Himself to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. That is a powerful message to end the conversation with. Of course, people might be asking, but how? Well, if you need more how, other than what I'll be explained, well, Professor Oluwafemi is available. It's available to provide you with material with his time. He can teach you. He have a training program about it. There is book also coming along the way. So he's available to take you to the next level in case maybe, because sometimes there are people that have the information, but they need somebody to hold them by the hand and show them the way. Yeah. So he's available to help you on that. So on that way, I want to say thank you so much for accompanying us to the end of this conversation. It really be very interesting on our part to make this contribution. I would believe that it has helped you. And if you have done so, please let us know in the comment section below. Oluwafemi is always available to respond to your question. If you have any question or a personal intervention, he's available. And it's our duty to bring in more people of high value to add value to you. So thank you so much for your time. And thank you so much for your time, Professor Oluwafemi. It's been a pleasure here.
Thank you.
Thank you.